Tonight, 2015 devastated Canada's Conservatives. I'll tell you my plan to rebuild the right. It's December 18th, and you're watching the Ezra Levant Show. Why should others go to jail when you're the biggest carbon consumer I know?
There's 8,500 customers here, and you won't give them an answer.
You come here once a year with a sign, and you feel morally superior.
The only thing I have to say to the government for why I publish it is because it's my bloody right to do so.
Right after the federal election, when Stephen Harper lost and Justin Trudeau won, I gave my analysis of the campaign, but I said the main issue now for Conservatives isn't the Conservative Party of Canada. That's actually the strongest part of the movement. The main problem is everything else. You can see my full video commentary on that by clicking here, but let me give you a 30-second recap. Sure, the Conservative Party lost the election, but it got 32% of the vote, won 99 seats in Parliament. It'll reinvigorate itself through a leadership race, and we'll have a lot to say about that in the months ahead. But my point is, the real problem today for Canada's right is that over the last 9 years, with Stephen Harper as Prime Minister, Conservatives didn't organize much in the community because why bother? So we don't have a lot of NGOs or non-governmental organizations. We don't have a lot of student clubs or public interest law firms or conservative media. Outside of the Conservative Party, our side doesn't have many rallies or issue campaigns or causes. Maybe it's because conservatives are too busy working for a living or doing normal things as opposed to going to trumped up protests. But by nature, I don't think conservatives are activists. We mock people who say their job is community organizer. But I think it's mainly that we thought the world was okay with Harper as Prime Minister. So we weren't motivated to be political, except a few conservative groups that were marginalized over the past decade, like pro-life groups. For everyone else, everything else, Harper was taking care of it. Whereas the left, who were shut out of Ottawa for a decade, well, they organized like crazy. Obviously, big labor unions are always rabble-rousing, but the left created literally dozens of activist groups on every possible issue. You can see proof of that in the Elections Canada list of registered third-party campaign groups that fought against the Conservatives in the election. There are 114 of those NGOs on this list. I've read the list, and I can find literally just one on the right. It's worse than 100 against 1 odds. This is no accident. The left has been working on this in an organized, strategic manner for many years. The environmentalist left has been organizing against Harper and against the oil sands with millions of dollars since at least 2008, with detailed campaign plans. They started with a $7 million a year campaign, and look at all their front groups: Greenpeace, Sierra Club, Environmental Defense, Pembina Institute. Starting about 3 years ago, the Canadian Auto Workers, later named Uniform, drafted a massive 52-page campaign plan involving every possible leftist group. They all met at the auto workers' big compound over a weekend and hammered out their multi-million-dollar plan. This is not a conspiracy. It's called organizing. They did it. We didn't. And so now the left runs the federal government and every provincial government except in BC and Saskatchewan. So now the left has the best of both worlds, the official levers of power and 113 left-wing NGOs to keep them in power and to keep pressuring their governments to stay left-wing. And where are we? What's worse is that by being dormant for the last 9 years, the right has missed the whole digital revolution, the Facebook wars, the Twitter wars, Snapchat, Kik, WhatsApp, a dozen new ways of communicating directly with millions of people, especially with the younger Canadians. Our side is so behind. That's not to say there's no one. We have some allies. There are a handful of think tanks like the Fraser Institute and the Montreal Economic Institute and the Frontier Center, but they're not really political. They're research and academic folks. I mean, I'm talking about community organizing. There's the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. They're great, including their campus project, Generation Screwed, but that's 1% the size of Unifor's campaign. There are 2 public interest law firms on the right. There's the Canadian Constitution Foundation and there's the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, but they're so small, just a couple lawyers each. And I think I'm pretty much done listing everyone in the country. In the media, it's gone from bad to worse. Sun News Network closed in February, of course. Many of the great conservative talk radio voices like Dave Rutherford and Charles Adler are either off the air or on smaller stations. Under Conrad Black, post-media newspapers were conservative. Now, from the Ottawa Citizen to the Calgary Herald, they tilt left. And even the National Post gets more wobbly each year, with their last comment pages editor bragging that he voted NDP, and the one before him secretly working as Justin Trudeau's ghostwriter under the table without disclosing that to readers. Compare that to the left. Here is the list of left-wing NGOs that the Tides Canada Foundation gives money to each year. Dozens and dozens and dozens of groups, sometimes $250,000, sometimes just a few thousand, sometimes just a few $100. But they're cementing the networks. They're incubating little NGOs. They're promoting young up-and-comers, trying to get them to make a career in politics. They know most of their money is probably wasted, but they don't care. Even a failed left-wing NGO gets people thinking of themselves as political activists. It buys those activists loyalty for when it counts, whether it's a big rally or a big election. And when you create a whole ecosystem, that's the word the left uses, and it's fitting, of lawyers and rabble-rousers and speakers and organizers and, yeah, even rioters on the left, well, they harmonize. They develop a momentum of their own. They develop a peer pressure, a certainty, a glamour. So even Canada's B-list celebrities, C-list celebrities like Angry Mary Walsh or washed-up bands like Blue Rodeo, they felt the comfort and the need even to jump into the last election to disparage Stephen Harper. Can you name a single celebrity on the right in Canada other than Don Cherry? So what should we do? I've been thinking about it for a few weeks. Obviously, I see an important role for the Rebel, not just to give the other side of the story that the other media won't, but also to provide air support to anyone else out there who's trying to do something great on the right. We love to interview activists like John Carpay and Sonia Schickman, our free speech lawyers, or Paige McPherson and other Taxpayers Federation activists, Sheila Gunn Reid, our own Alberta bureau chief. She's been absolutely indispensable to getting the story out about the Alberta NDP's war on farmers and oilmen. And seriously, just from a mental health point of view, I think a lot of Conservatives would go crazy if we had to listen to the media party's erotica instead of real news. Remember this?
The one that the entire country wants to know. What shampoo do you use?
Yeah. So we're going to keep giving her here at The Rebel. We're going to expand our coverage. This month, we added a weekly show hosted by Faith Goldie called On the Hunt. I hope to convince her to make it more frequent than just weekly. And as we can afford to, we'll add more shows, including, I hope, a live call-in show, which would be a hoot. I'd like to bring on a full-time reporter in Vancouver one day. Add a full-time reporter in Toronto, two of the worst-managed socialist cities in Canada. I think we could use another teammate in Ottawa to help Brian Lilly cover that target-rich environment. Obviously, that's a lot of payroll expenses I've just listed there. And unlike the CBC, we don't get any government money, so we've got to be careful not to overextend ourselves. But I want to let you know some of our hopes for 2016. But look, the Rebel will have a part in rebuilding the right. We'll help report the news the media party ignores. We'll provide you commentary you can't find elsewhere on everything from global warming to terrorism to mass Muslim migration. We'll even do some activism like our campaign against Alberta's carbon tax right now. But we can't do everything. But I have a plan to help rebuild the right that I've been tinkering with over the past month, in addition to growing the Rebel. It's the plan that Preston Manning came up with about 10 years ago when he started the Manning Center. Here's a picture of Preston standing in front of a pyramid. This picture, I think, is 8-9 years old. Manning would say that any conservative political leader is at the top of that pyramid there, but he or she couldn't be successful unless there is conservative political infrastructure underneath him. You can see near the top there, he writes issue campaigns. Under that is communications vehicles, media, in other words. Near the bottom there, you see universities, intellectuals. At the bottom of the whole thing, you can see conservative donors creating a culture of political philanthropy in Canada, like the Tides Foundation and the unions have done. We don't have that in Canada on the right. I mean, Canadian businesses don't give anything to conservatives. They're too risk averse. They're too easily bullied by social justice warriors. And of course, they're barred by law from giving to political parties. So that's what Manning said he would do. But after 10 years, it just wasn't done. In fact, he's abandoned that pyramid, which used to be his logo. It's not anymore. I can't name a single issue campaign Manning has done other than his weird campaign for carbon taxes. There's no student clubs he's started, no system of micro grants to help incubate baby conservatives. A glance at his 2013 Revenue Canada charity return shows that he spent 60% of his charitable money, more than $1 million, on management expenses and another 27% on fundraising expenses. It's nuts. I'm going to stop beating up on Preston Manning now, but my point is, what he did didn't work. Ironically, on page 15 of the Canadian Auto Workers campaign plan, they used Manning's pyramid as a guide for their successful campaign, just as Manning had phased out that strategy for himself. Anyways, here's my plan. I'm just going to tell it to you because it's not a secret. It's sort of the opposite of a secret. I'm going to keep the Rebel as my main project. It has to be. It's what I love. It's what we've worked so hard to build this year. But we need to help rebuild the right through more than just media coverage. So I am proposing two concrete things. The first is to revive a nonprofit I set up a little over a year ago called the Joseph Howe Institute. It's named after the first Premier of Nova Scotia, who's the closest thing Canada has to a free speech hero. Last year, we had a great student conference in Toronto where we brought together 24 young journalism students and other amateur journalists for a weekend. The theme of the conference was communicating energy. So half of it was giving real facts about things like the oil sands and fracking and global warming. So we had speakers like Fela McAleer of Frack Nation and Mark Morano of Climate Depot and Alex Epstein of the Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. The other half of the time was teaching real journalism skills, practical writing skills, digital media skills. We even had homework overnight with prizes the next day for the best writing. It was fun. A number of those young journalists have gone on to great things in various media, including Lauren Southern. There's one face you'll recognize. She's a star with the Rebel. So I want to revive the Joseph Howe Institute. Number one, I want to make the journalism conference an annual event again. Bring in the brightest 24 students from across Canada, show them they're not alone, have a great weekend of learning the other side of the story on key issues, learn some journalism skills. Number two, create journalism internships for the best and brightest students to be embedded in the media across the country, including mainstream media. I mean, why not? Why not have freedom-oriented journalists working everywhere on any beat? The left sure does it. Let's balance that out. Let's help these students get a start in the profession. I mean, thinking selfishly, I also see the Institute as a source of talent for the Rebel, a source of young, energetic recruits from across Canada as we expand. Okay, number three, sponsor Joseph Howe campus clubs across Canada, especially at universities that have journalism schools. Those schools are uniformly left-wing. Let's provide a counterweight, a place where conservative or libertarian journalists aren't berated by their left-wing professors. Number four, let's start an annual conservative-oriented journalism gala and awards night to celebrate and glamorize freedom-oriented reporting. The left does it like crazy. Here are left-wing reporters Stephen Maher and Glenn McGregor picking up a $5,000 check from a leftist activist group for their robocall stories that were later proven to be a trumped-up hoax. That's union boss Jim Stanford giving them the prize. Why can't we glamorize conservative, independent journalism on our side too? And finally, let's set up an endowment where we can sponsor professional journalism on a full-time basis, for example, to help cover the cost of an investigative journalist here at the Rebel. A journalistic endowment at Joseph Howe Institute could help subsidize our journalism here at the Rebel and elsewhere. Total cost? I think we need one full-time staffer to run it, to run the conference, help organize the student clubs, chair the annual gala. So between that staffer and all the costs, I think that's $250,000 a year. But imagine its impact over 10 years. 250 student journalists over 10 years, trained at our 10 conferences, hundreds more at our campus clubs, an incentive for balanced journalism. I think dollar for dollar is probably the most effective way to help turn the tide. I've got one more idea I'd like to propose today. Another nonprofit I set up a few years ago is called For Canada. It was an issue campaign nonprofit. We did things like help fight against the Nanaimo City Hall that banned a Christian conference from that city, for example. Again, it's been dormant as we focused our efforts on building the Rebel, but I'd like to transform it into a Tides Foundation-like NGO incubator, as in to do what the bottom rung on Manning's abandoned pyramid was, to create a culture of conservative philanthropy, but to use a startup incubator-style approach like Tides does. The Tides Foundation doesn't give out grants. It gives out grants, but it doesn't just give out grants. It has something they call a shared platform. So if you're a leftist activist with an idea, no matter how kooky, they'll help you. And they'll take care of all the boring stuff so you can get on with blocking that pipeline or whatever. I mean, that website we just scrolled through there, they'll help you set up your corporate bylaws and help you do your paperwork and your accounting. They'll handle your payroll for you if you like. They've got a group insurance policy you can use. They'll help you get a lease or review contracts. They'll even help you write up grant applications to get more money from other people. So they'll do that back end stuff so their hundreds of activists can focus on hating Stephen Harper or hating a pipeline or whatever they're protesting against today. Now, Tides Canada gives away about $24 million a year last I checked, and Tides in San Francisco gives away about $150 million. Why don't we start off with, say, $250,000? Here's what I'd do with For Canada as our answer to Tides. I'd hire a manager for this project, whose job would be to receive applications and review them, and on a regular basis make decisions for micro grants, as small as $500, maybe as high as $10,000. That manager would probably get a volunteer list of smart philanthropists or sort of elder statesman type business people to help review all the grant applications. And several times a year, I don't know, maybe every 90 days or so, they'd sit down and they all go through the applications and they would give away money. But not without strings attached. Now, those strings would be just what Tides does. Are you doing your paperwork properly? Are you doing your accounting? Do you have a business plan? Do you need insurance? All the boring stuff that might stop a young conservative from getting going. The full-time staffer would help do that. Maybe we'd help provide a webmaster to set up a good-looking website for an activist, for example. Over time, we would create a whole ecosystem of little conservative NGOs too. Some projects would fail. Some would succeed, but everyone would be joining the community. We would have an annual conference of all the NGOs, meet each other, learn from each other, have some inspirational speeches, share best practices, probably have a gala and an annual prize for best conservative NGO of the year. Why not? We'd create a culture of conservative philanthropy, but more of a culture of social investing, as the left calls it, conservative ethical investing. And signal to the few conservative businessmen who give money to leftist causes like universities that they don't have to give $1 million to leftists like York University or even the University of Calgary. They can give $1 million, or how about just $100,000 to For Canada? And we will disperse it to young up-and-comers and we'll help accelerate their work like a high-tech startup does, an incubator. Total annual budget, how about $250,000 for year one, including one full-time staffer and a volunteer board of grant approvers. Ideally, we'd give out 10 grand a month. Average grant, I don't know, $2,500. An annual conference, hopefully over time we'd grow. I doubt we would ever rival Tides in terms of size, but I'd like to get it up to $1 million a year. So there you have it. I've thought a lot about how to rebuild the right in Canada. It looks pretty daunting and it feels pretty lonely right now. 8 out of 10 provinces, the federal government, the courts, the media, the universities, popular culture, all the NGOs, it's all left-wing. But I bet that's how the left felt in 2006 when Harper won, or how the left felt in 2000 in the United States when George W. Bush won. Look, the pendulum swings left and right. It's far to the left right now, as far as possible. It's going to swing back to the right as Canadians realize what a disaster Rachel Notley is, and Trudeau will be. And as we're reminded of the pain of taxes and deficits, and as we're reminded of liberal corruption and entitlement. It's our job to take the next 4 or 8 years we have to prepare the ground, to build the political infrastructure that, like the left did over the past 10 years, that Manning didn't do, but that we can do. To use the Rebel as a hub to provide news and commentary and publicity and encouragement and to help with activism. I want to revive the Joseph Howe Institute to recruit a new generation of journalists to stop the outrageous bias in media coverage, to incubate a generation of young activists and help give them angel investments through For Canada. Give them seed money, help them avoid little mistakes if we can, help them with the boring stuff, the paperwork, so they can get on with the exciting stuff. What do you think? Do you agree with my plan? I'm not going to run it. I'm busy running the Rebel, but I want to organize it, help lead it, help fundraise it. I want to hire a leader for the Joseph Howe Institute. I want to hire a leader for Canada. I want to get them set up and get them rolling, and I want to report on their good news to you. I want to fill the void and help others along the way who are doing the same. What do you think? I mean, it's a long journey back, I'll tell you that. But that's okay. Gives us time to do it right. Will you help me rebuild the right? Go to www.rebuildtheright.ca. I'm looking to raise $500,000 for 2016. I know that sounds like a lot. It's actually less than 1% of what the left spends, but it's a start. If you want to talk to me about making a larger contribution, either financially or in other ways, drop me a note too to Ezra@therebel.media. I'm ready to get to work. Are you? Stay with me. After the break, I talked to a couple of conservative leaders about my plan, and I asked them, what do they think? You'll see their answers after this break. Well, that's my plan to rebuild the right. What do other conservative strategists think? People who helped build the Reform Party, the Canadian Alliance, fuse it together in the Conservative Party, people who've been around for a few fights. Joining me now from Calgary via Skype is an old professor of mine, my friend Tom Flanagan. He still teaches at the University of Calgary, and he was a strategist for Stephen Harper, Preston Manning, and he joins me now. Tom, great to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you, Ezra.
Now, I sent you my plan for rebuilding the right, and I gave you a chance to ponder it and look at it. I want you to give me your unvarnished opinion. I have not heard your criticisms of it yet. It's a simple plan. I want to build the Rebel as sort of a clearinghouse, and I want to set up or revive two nonprofits, a journalism-oriented group called the Joseph Howe Institute, and then a micro-grant incubator for conservative NGOs called For Canada. I want to raise $250,000 for each, hire a leader for each. That's my plan. It's not a huge plan, but I think it meets two urgent gaps. Okay, you've heard my pitch. Tom, give me your full feedback.
Well, first of all, I think your diagnosis is right on, Ezra. I think it's very true that the conservative movement tended to atrophy while the Conservative Party was in power. Perhaps that's inevitable because all the bright, young, politically active people are going to be attracted into the party or into the government. But it is time to start rebuilding the movement. So I think your diagnosis is completely correct. And we see the damage now when, as you point out, there are swarms of progressive groups out there in the environmental field and the Aboriginal field, and unions, of course, are always there. And we don't really have much to fight back with. We have a few, but not very many. So, yeah, we do need more. I also particularly like your idea of the Joseph Howe Media Institute. The Canadian media are a big problem. We sometimes get support from editorial writers, but the working journalists tend to bat left. And so the coverage, even in nominally conservative outlets, the coverage is often skewed to the left, particularly on issues like so-called climate change. So, something like a Joseph Howe Institute would certainly be a step in the right direction. I'll give to that today if the account is open.
That's nice. I set up the Joseph Howe about 1.5 years ago, and we had a student conference. It was great. I mean, some real stars there. I put that aside while we started the Rebel, but I want to revive it again. What about the micro grants? I look at Tides. What's fascinating is how many little grants they give, Tom. I mean, they give their $250,000 grants, but they'll give out $500, which probably the amount of time they're puttering for $500, you might say, is it worth it? Well, yeah, it's worth it because they get a fan, a friend, an ally for life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. I just don't know as much about this. I haven't played in that league, so I'm not quite sure how it all works. But I look at the results that these American foundations are getting by giving these grants. I guess they have, you have to have somebody to give it to. Now, in the case of the Tides, they often are giving it to First Nations who have even if it's kind of sketchy, they have an organization there to receive some money. I guess you can't just give money to individuals. anyway, Sam, I don't have personal experience playing in that league, but on the surface, it looks like a good idea.
Well, I mean, I showed briefly the list of 114 registered third-party campaign groups in the last election. I mean, just stop and think about that. I mean, in the States, they call those super PACs. In Canada, we have slightly different rules, but that's the closest analogy. 114 of them, 113 are on the left. I mean, it's almost a comedy, 100 to 1. Some of them are useless, but some of them are huge, like Lead Now. Avaz, headquartered out of New York, was actually a Canadian third-party campaigner. I don't even know how that's allowed for a foreign-based NGO to campaign, but Elections Canada was fine with it. I mean, I don't want to pick on Professor Manning because I've talked about him too much, and I think he had his chance for 10 years. I don't think he really did it. But the Manning Center didn't register, and I know he's got the charitable side, but he's got the non-charitable side. Where were the allies? Did we have any allies out there in this last election that you could detect?
Very few. And actually, in the one ally that tried to step forward, the party, the government shut it down, or I should say the party shut it down because they, I think, mistakenly were trying to use the Prime Minister's personal name in what they were doing. But the general point is that I think Canadian business has to step up to the plate. And they should be willing to do this, at the federal level now and in an increasing number of provinces. They are blocked from contributing any large amounts of money to political parties. So they've been taken off the hook on that side. But I think if business wants results, they've got to get in the game. The unions are in there already with these third-party advocacy groups that operate during or around election time. And so this is something else that needs to happen as part of your plan. Maybe not today, but it has to happen that Canadian business has to be made aware of the political opportunities here that do require some substantial amount of money at a certain point. Maybe you can get started on a shoestring, but if you're going to run an ad campaign, you do need some money. So that's another thing that has to be factored in here is outreach to Canadian business and get them with us.
Yeah, I remember before those election donation laws were brought in, I think if I recall, they were brought in by Jean Chrétien and then strengthened by Stephen Harper. I remember back in the day, 10, 15 years ago, where banks, investment firms, oil companies, law firms, accounting firms would give, seriously, $100,000 to parties, some of them more than that. That was sort of your entry level to play. And when the laws changed, I bet some corporate officers said, oh, great, we don't have to be shaken down now for our annual $250,000 a year in payoff dough for the parties. But instead of putting that money into the political process through other ways, they said, oh, good, we're saving $250,000 a year, but look at the billions of dollars just Alberta's own oil patch will pay by having Justin Trudeau and Rachel Notley in power. I mean, what's the cost of the carbon tax? What's the cost of blocking pipelines? So it's a false savings when these big corporations say, oh, good, I don't have to pay $250,000. Well, get ready for your $250 million hit. But Tom, there's something more than just the accounting side. I think Canadian business leaders are easily bullied. I think that in the United States, there are enough strong individuals who say, I'm going to support a conservative cause and I don't care who knows. But in Canada, we don't have that culture of conservative philanthropy. And if there's some big shot, whether it's Peter Munk or Seymour Schulich or some big shot giving money, they give it to a university that basically hoovers it up for overhead, or maybe they give it to a hospital. So there is large giving by conservatives, but it never goes to the ideas, the philosophy of freedom that made them wealthy in the first point. The last comment to you, Tom.
Yeah, I agree with that. In Ontario, the unions have basically hijacked the electoral process the last several elections. The unions have spent more money on advertising than any party, perhaps more money than all parties combined, and it's just negative ads against the conservative leader. I've talked this over in Ontario with people and say, why isn't Ontario business getting into this? And they say, well, businessmen say we're afraid if we put money into advertising that the unions will, levy reprisals against us. They'll stir up our workforce. We might have strikes. So, yeah, I think people have to get beyond this attitude. They have to be willing to take some risks, or they're going to be stuck with the McGuinty-Wynne government forever. So this has been going on for quite a while. And our side really is way behind, and I think it's high time to catch up.
Well, my plan is fairly modest. I mean, the Rebel, even though we're doing great in terms of viewers and things like that, we're a fairly small operation. These two parts of the plan, the Joseph Howe Institute Journalism Plan and the For Canada Micro Grant Plan, they're $250,000 each. I mean, I know that's a laugh to the unions who spend, $20 million, but we've got to start somewhere. Tom,
Absolutely.
I appreciate your feedback, and over 2016, as we get this thing going, I'd like your feedback some more. We're also going to talk to Monty Solberg, who has been on the other side. He's been a cabinet minister. He's been a candidate himself. I look forward to his views and his most candid criticisms, too. We're going to roll this out in 2016, and hopefully we can start to make a difference. The good news is also the bad news. We've got 4 or maybe 8 years to get it right. Anyways, thanks for joining us today, Tom Flanagan. It's nice to see you again.
Okay, Ezra, bye-bye.
Right on. Stay with us, folks. After these words, we'll talk to my friend Monty.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know the Rebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to therebel.media/store to find out more.
Welcome back. Well, you've heard my plan to rebuild the right, and I bounced it off Tom Flanagan, a longtime conservative strategist. Well, let's talk to a fellow who's been a longtime warrior for conservative causes, both in the partisan side and as a cabinet minister, too. I'm talking about my old friend, Monty Solberg, who joins us now via Skype. Hey, Monty, great to see you again.
Great to be with you, Ezra.
Well, thank you. Now, I sent you my Rebuild the Right script earlier today. Did you have a chance to look through it at my ideas for trying to get things going on the nonpartisan side of the conservative fight?
I did, Ezra, and I think you've got some great ideas. I think one of the challenges for conservatives in Canada is that we have lived off the capital of what we had built in the past, and we could do that because we had a conservative government in Ottawa and conservative-leaning governments in much of the rest of the country. But we burnt up a lot of that capital, and we just don't have, some of those institutions that our American colleagues, for instance, have in spades. And as a result of that, when we finally get bounced to opposition, we're not in a very strong position to go ahead and be an effective opposition and sort of build a new conservative movement. So I think you're completely on the right track, and I love some of your ideas.
Well, thanks very much. I also want you to be a critic too, Monty, because I'm sort of revealing this idea in real time. I bounced it off a few folks, and I read out my plan on TV a few moments ago. What do you think the weaknesses of it are? I think one of the weaknesses is it's a small plan. Like, in a way, my full plan for 2016 is 2 staff people and $500,000. And I know that the labor unions in Canada spend 100 times that. Tides Canada itself spends $25 million a year. So this is a laughable baby step compared to them. So that's my chief criticism, it's thinking small. But even that small step, I think, fills a void that right now is pretty empty.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. It may be small, but we have to start somewhere. And I think it is a weakness in Canada that we just don't have conservative media the way, for instance, our American friends do. And thank goodness for the Rebel. I think you're doing a terrific job. But what's really important about it is that it's not just, a bunch of talking points. It's not just sort of a facile approach to criticizing a government somewhere. It's really building the infrastructure underneath and arming people with some great intellectual skills that will allow them to go and influence a whole bunch of other people. And I just think it's critical if we want to, have a conservative government in Ottawa again one day, a conservative government in Alberta, and of course, eventually crack the big time in Ontario as well, and make sure that we have conservatives there, but not just any kind of conservatives, not just conservatives, who are called conservative, but people who can articulate a conservative vision, for instance, for the economy, which is where I think it all starts.
I think you're right. The idea of having campus clubs for the Joseph Howe Institute, that's the conservative-leaning journalism nonprofit I'm talking about. Journalism schools are really political training labs for the left. And simply having a haven where like-minded conservatives can meet and maybe bring in guest speakers and then bring those folks together for a national conference once a year, those are small things. But I remember when my very first day at law school at University of Alberta way back in the day, I met someone with the Laissez-Faire Club, and I thought, yes, I've got a place where I can meet like-minded people, and just having that campus club really helped set me on my track. And I can imagine how lonely it is to be a conservative journalism student these days. So to have those student clubs, to have an annual conference where you meet like-minded people so you know you're not alone, to have an internship. I know those sound like small things, but I don't think that the right is doing that right now. I think the biased media is probably the largest problem, because a left-wing media would smother any good works done by any conservative NGO.
Well, you'll remember this well, Ezra. You were part of this, back in the day when Alberta Report started. And this is, now we're going back 30 years. But the Byfields at the time trained a whole bunch of young people, young journalists, really trained from almost nothing, and produced several, I will say, great Canadian writers who have since gone on to other things. And, in many cases, they're still doing their thing for the conservative cause. It shows you what you can do with just a modest budget and somebody who is really determined, to teach people how to report, how to write well, and how to report from a conservative perspective. And, people like Colby Kosh and Lauren Gunter and many others that we could point to. And Ezra, you wrote for them at various times. There are many, great Canadian journalists who've went through that internship with the Byfields. And, unfortunately, that great experiment kind of came to an end, but it really points the way forward.
I'm so glad you reminded me of that. You're right. That's where I learned whatever basic journalism skills I have. It came from there. I know you've got to run, Monty. I'm grateful for your time. I want to ask you about the other part. So one part, it's the Joseph Howe Institute. It's a nonprofit for journalism. The other is something that I'm modeling after the Tides Foundation. They give so many grants, and I think the best analogy is like they're a Silicon Valley startup incubator. They have a pile of money. In Canada, it's about $25 million a year. And anyone with an idea, they fill out an application, they have to go through a checklist, and they get some seed money. $100, $1,000, $1 million, whatever it is. So they have seeded, they have incubated. It's like a greenhouse where they start with little saplings and a few of them grow to mighty oaks. I don't think we do that here. What do you think of the idea of putting together a pool of dough and having some thoughtful people review applications? And the average grant, I think, would be like $2,500. But it would be enough to turn a would-be activist into a permanent activist. And maybe over time, you can repopulate the battlefield, which is pretty empty. What do you think of that idea?
I love that idea. I think one of the things actually missing from the discussion in conservative circles in Canada is sort of that entrepreneurial, sort of supporting the entrepreneurial community, or linking conservatism with entrepreneurs. And really, we're talking about political entrepreneurs here. And, $2,500 isn't a ton of money, but it's enough to, set up a website and start to get your ideas out there and build a little community around whatever your idea is. So I love that idea for a couple of reasons. And, I would love to be part of anything that you do on that, Ezra, and would love to help in any way I can.
Well, that's amazing. I might call on you to be part of a panel. In my mind, I see having an application form online, and some young conservative guy or gal could fill it out, And then maybe every month or every 90 days, we put together a panel of folks with a little bit of experience and judgment on them, and maybe you would be one of them, and we would review a stack of applications every couple months, and we would say, oh, you got to tweak this or improve this, and we would approve, and our goal would be to push money out there, and we would help, some campus activist, he or she may not know, well, how do I do bylaws? How do I get insurance? How do I, basic stuff, paperworky stuff, we would provide that shared platform. That's what the Tides calls it. They say, well, we can help you get insurance. We can help you fill out forms. We can help do your annual accounting for you. So they do the boring stuff to allow their activists to do the exciting stuff. I think we could be not just an incubator giving dough, but we could help with the paperworky regulatory stuff and even websites and best practices. And maybe once a year we'd have a conference where all these NGOs and young people would get together and cross-pollinate. So, it's starting small, $250,000 for Joseph Howe, $250,000 for For Canada, of which most would hopefully be given out in grants. I don't know. I just think that you do that for a few years and you start to get some momentum.
In Calgary alone, there are scores of young people who would be attracted to that idea. I run into them all the time here, and they're always, trying new things and bouncing ideas off me. I think immediate hit. I don't think you'll have any problem attracting a lot of people to that idea. Hopefully, attracting lots of funders too.
Well, that's great. Monty Solberg, thanks so much. And if you have other thoughts that come to you later, send me a note. And I don't just mean you, Monty, I mean all our viewers. Send me an email to ezra@therebel.media. If you have an idea of how to tweak this plan, I'm sort of making it up as I talk about it. But for 2016, that's my goal. $250,000 for the Joseph Howe journalism side, $250,000 for the For Canada micro grant side. Over 4, 5, 6, 8 years, I think we're going to rebuild the right. Monty, thanks for joining us from Calgary. Appreciate your time. Folks, stay with us. My final thoughts after these words.
Ontario residents are being hosed on electricity prices. The latest Auditor General's report says we've been overcharged by $37 billion over the last several years. That works out to nearly $2,800 for every man, woman, and child. Why? Mismanagement and bad policy choices from the Ontario Liberals. It's going to cost us billions more in coming years. Energy Minister Bob Chiarelli won't take responsibility. He's lashing out. It's time for Bob to go. If you agree, go to firebob.ca. That's firebob.ca and make your voice heard.
So what do you think of my plan to rebuild the right? I don't mean the Conservative Party. They'll be fine. I mean all of the things we've neglected for the past 10 years, the nonpartisan conservative infrastructure, everything from issue campaigns to student clubs on campus to public interest law firms to the media. The things that the left spent their time building up while they were out of power, now the left is back in power and they still have all their community organizations too. We've got neither. I know things look pretty bleak right now, and they will for at least 4 years, maybe 8. Well, that gives us the time we need to build back up. I say let's get started. It's a huge job, but let's start with step 1. The Rebel will obviously be a key part of it. We need to give Canadians the other side of the story that the media party won't. And we need to highlight the good work being done by conservative activists who are out there. So I'm not going anywhere. We've got to build the Rebel up even bigger. More shows, more videos, more reporters. That's my main job. But I want to do 2 other projects too. Over the years, I've started a few nonprofits. I want to revive 2 of them and give them new purpose. I want to build up the Joseph Howe Institute, the conservative journalism nonprofit. I want to start a conservative journalism club at campuses across the country. I want to sponsor internships, both at the Rebel and other media too. I want to have an annual student journalism conference and an awards gala for the best conservative journalism in the country. And finally, I want to create an endowment fund to sponsor the kind of journalism other media won't do, like investigative journalism into liberal corruption, which you know is coming back hard. So that's the first project. I think it'll cost $250,000, including 1 full-time staffer and the costs of the internships and the conference and the prize. My second main idea is what in Silicon Valley would be called a startup incubator. The goal would be to raise money to give it away to young conservatives with big plans. Most would be micro grants, a few $1,000s, maybe even a few $100s. Anyone with an idea would apply for a grant, and Every few months, we'd sit down and review the applications and cut checks like we were venture capitalists financing a .com, except that we'd be social investors financing conservative NGOs. The rate of return would not be financial, it would be a political rate of return. We'd also help them with best practices, drafting corporate bylaws for them, helping with legal and accounting and insurance. Things that are important but probably too boring or maybe difficult for young activists. We'd do that, help them focus on the fun stuff, the good stuff. So for this, maybe one full-time staffer, plus a volunteer panel to review and approve the grants. Total budget for 2016, $250,000, of which at least half would be given away. That's how the Left-Wing Tides Foundation does it. They give away about $24 million a year to Canadian leftists, last I checked. Let's start with 1% of that. So that's my plan. It's not a huge plan, but I think it helps get things going. Total budget for Joseph Howe Institute and for Canada is $500,000 for the next year. Total staff, 2 people, plus some volunteers. But over time, we'd plant a lot of seeds. Now, some wouldn't grow, maybe even most wouldn't. But even if we just graduated half a dozen great conservative journalists a year and helped start half a dozen conservative NGOs a year, well, imagine what that might look like cumulatively by the year 2020 or 2025. What do you think? I'd love your help. I'd love your advice. And if you can afford it, I'd love for you to contribute financially. Go to www.rebuildtheright.ca. It seems like it'll take a journey of 1,000 miles before conservatives win back government again. That's okay, I don't mind. If you want to join me on that journey, go to rebuildtheright.ca. Good night, everybody. Have a great weekend.